I'm pleased to present you research of intangible assets contribution to the growth of the Russian economy. In recent decades, the long-term economic growth of leading developed countries is determined by factors of production that are most susceptible to new technologies. Among these factors, along with highly qualified workforce and information and communication equipment, are intangible assets. What do we know about intangibles in Russian economic growth? In particular, intangible assets accounting has become possible due to the publication of industry indicators of output, labor, capital, and total factor productivity in the framework of the World Claim project, Russia Claims. Here we present value-added decomposition of number of European countries for the period 1995-2000, calculated on the basis of the Euro Claims data series, and the same information about Russia based on Russia Claims. We can see the contribution of labor to the growth of value added, the contribution of ICT and non-ICT capital services, as well as the contribution of TFP. ICT capital, in a certain way, reflects the contribution of intangible assets. Well, as we can see, the average value of the contribution of ICT capital services among the Euro countries is 0.388 percentage points, with an average GDP growth is 1.946. The highest contribution of ICT capital services during the reporting period is observed in the UK. At the same time, the share of ICT capital in the contribution of capital services exceeds the share of non-ICT capital, and the similar situation is also observed in Austria. In Russia, contribution of ICT capital much lower than European and was just 0.17 percentage points. TFP contributes most to growth. Why may such difference occur? Perhaps it arises due to the methods imperfection or statistical limitation. We have some general problems of intangibles measurement. It's important to note that an asset such as intangible capital is difficult to measure. This is associated with a number of reasons related to the peculiarities of national accounting systems, in particular accounting standards. Moreover, economists' interest of intangibles is quite young. At first time, all attention was focused on ICT as a messenger of the computer revolution. So both at the company level and in the practice of accounting for national income, expenditures of intangible resources such as software and R&D have historically been subsumed under intermediate costs and not as a part of GDP investments. Anyway, economists are improving approaches to valuing intangibles and their contribution to economic growth. And we would like to focus on one of advanced approach for measuring intangibles proposed by Carol Carada, Charles Halton, and Daniel Sickle. They developed evaluation technique by measuring extended list of intangible assets at the cumulative level, extend beyond to their correlation with ICT. Carada used the economic view of investment to formalize the case for capitalizing on a wide range of intangible assets, not only R&D and ICT, in companies and national accounts. They included three integrated categories of intangibles in the assessment and proposed options for accounting all of them. Carada approach changed the understanding of economic growth and the contribution of intangible assets. So labor productivity decomposition for business sector EU countries growth is as follows. Here we clearly see the significant contribution of intangible assets directly to growth. Maybe in this slide it's better see that the intangible capital is a lot of contribute to growth. Well, and the key questions for us is following. At the same time, approach of Karada has not been applied to Russia yet. So we made an attempt to apply a new approach to the valuation of intangibles in the Russian economy and capitalized an expanded list of intangible. We have also investigated the possibilities and resources of current statistical forms, official observations, and industry studies. We use new estimates to address the following issues. What is the contribution of intangible capital to growth? How the inclusion of intangible assets affect the distribution of growth between capital accumulation and growth of TFP? And what is the increase in growth after 2004 with intangible assets? So as far as we know, this is the first article that addresses this issue as part of accounting for a growth with expanded list of intangible assets in Russia. So 3 integrated categories of intangible assets looks as follow. The first, computerized information, consists of software and database. The main component of computerized information, computer software, is already included as a fixed investment in the SNA. Innovative property consists of well-known mineral exploitation, R&D, entertainment and artistic originals. Also, the Karada list attempted to include all other costs of developing and launching new products and services, including market research, usually excluded from R&D, and all costs of improving production process beyond outlays on conventionally defined ICT and R&D. So it's the third general category, includes investments in economic competencies. This includes the cost of strategic planning, the cost of redesigning or reconfiguring existing products in existing markets, investing to maintain or increase market share, and investing in brands. Investing in special human structural resources includes the cost of training employees provided by employer. I should say that undoubtedly these costs are not accurately estimated, but business investments in specific human and structural resources through strategic planning, adaptation, reorganization, and professional development of employees are important of innovation and profitability in the industry and necessary approach to investment in order to be consistent with the theory of capital. So, in order to obtain objective estimates of investment, Karada takes into account also the source of intangible assets. So you can see that some kind of organizational structure can be purchased and can be internally made. So, therefore, the second task is to decide which part of the identifiable series of data on intangible expenses is an investment. So what part of a number of indicators fits the definition of investment as any use of resources that reduce current consumption in order to increase it in the future? Karada says that if economic research has clearly demonstrated that a given type of spending is fixed investment, then it categorized 100% of the total spending as capital spending. For example, it is scientific R&D. It's a long-lived investment. Second, if economic research suggests that only a portion of the spending on an intangible pays in the future year or years, these findings were applied. For example, based on the results of empirical literature on advertising, Karada estimates that only about 60% of total advertising spending was associated with advertising that had a lasting effect. As Karada notes, these third and fourth steps are less precise when there are strong suspicion that the lifetime of a type of intangible may not be at least 3 years, or part of the expenditure may be directed to routine tasks or represent current consumption. They discount the point estimated by 20%. So the next slide is about Russia. So based on the principles developed by the CRADA, we compiled data on intangible assets for Russia. For assets capitalized on the SNA 2008 standard, for example, investments in computerized information, mineral resources, and etc., Russia claims is the basic source of that series. Regarding research and development results, I should say that despite the fact that the asset is recommended for capitalization by the SNA standard, not all countries, including Russia, have so far included it in all relevant survey forms. Therefore, at the moment, the reference source of data for us on this asset has become the indicator of internal R&D costs published by Rosstat in the annual collection of industrial production in Russia. To evaluate assets such as expenses for new architecture and engineering design project, brand equity, and the purchased component of organizational capital, we relied on output indicators for the respective industry. To estimate the cost of new financial project, investment in human capital, and own account component of organizational capital, we worked with statistics on employment and wages. This table shows a comparison of the structure of capital expenditure and intangible assets of the USA and Russia according to available data and similar periods. And as we see, the structure and percentages in GDP are comparable. So maybe some types of intangible assets need a more accurate evaluation, and it will be future direction of our research. About empirical results, we can see this table, but I suppose more this one can show you. We believe that the inclusion of intangible assets significantly changes the measured model of economic growth. It was found that the growth rate of output increases a little bit more rapidly with the inclusion of intangible assets than in the base case, when intangible capital is completely ignored and the deepening of capital becomes the uniquely dominant source of growth while reducing the component of TFP. At the same time, intangible assets are still small, and further elaboration of the issue is necessary for better understanding this process. And some words about our future research direction. Russian statistics clearly show a lack of detailed information that would be consistent with the Russian system of national accounts. These limitations include the lack of data on gross fixed capital formation at a detailed assets type level, the absence of statistically agreed price indices for investment prices for certain types of capital is also significant. And the approach that we used in this work is based on extremely approximate correspondence of the technological structure of investment and fixed capital investments by types based on the Russian classification of assets. At the same time, taking into account the differences in price movement for certain types of capital, as can be seen, have a very large influence on the dynamics of capital. Finally, the estimate of the net stocks of fixed capital of the initial year on the basis of data on the replacement cost used in the work is far from the theoretically based market valuation of assets. The initial estimate of inventions of new intangible assets taken as zero in 1994 seems even more approximate. However, there is no higher quality data for the year of initial assessment collected by a single methodology and covering the entire economy. So that's all I want to say for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Our discussant is Kirsten Jaeger from the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies.
I should.
Okay.
Me?
Do you have a PowerPoint?
No.
Okay.
I'll tell you what.
Okay. Okay.
So it's my personal pleasure to be a discussant also on this paper here. I don't only like to work on CLAMs, but also on intangibles. And Carol Corrado has been a colleague of mine for many years, and I worked with her and Cecilia Iona-Lazinho and Jonathan Haskell also in various EU projects. And instead of preparing some slides here, I thought it would be more helpful for Ksenia to write her like 5 pages, very detailed comments with examples of what I mean, because this is part of her PhD, and I think she would benefit more from this here. And I will just tell you and explain what I would like to tell her for future work. So I'm happy about every country that's popping up in the intangible investment estimates and completing the picture. I hope that my comments help you to improve your paper. My general comment is that I suggest to work, this is the first paper on Russian intangibles. I suggest to work closer on the existing literature out there. You do a great job in the paper, but I think your results become more comparable if you work along the CHS methodology, but much closer. There are many papers out there. Corrado, Halden, and Sichel, they're so great in writing good papers. If you go to the Intanginvest webpage, the methodology is laid out there in great detail. They're updating the methodology on a frequent base. I've written some papers with Carol myself, but you can stick to any paper you wish. Coming back to your presentation and also the paper, I think you made a nice first attempt to look at the overall investment in intangibles as a percentage of GDP. But if I start reading a new paper on intangible, I would like to see a comparison of intangibles as a percentage of GDP, not only in intangibles, but also intangibles. So, because some countries like the United States have higher intangible investment than tangible. In other countries, it's the opposite picture. So whenever I see a paper, first I would like to see, so how is this country standing in terms of tangibles and intangibles? And then you could also distinguish between national accounts intangibles that are already included in the national accounts, non-national accounts intangibles. You might sum them up as total intangibles and then compare it with tangibles. So I would really like to see what is already in the national accounts and what is your own work, your own contribution, like what Carol and Jonathan and Cecilia are doing. And this, I think, for my taste, is partly missing in your paper. To me, it's not really clear what's national account intangibles and what is your own contribution to it. So I think you should make this distinction much more clearer. There are so many papers out there, and you could just work along these papers as a start. In future research, you could do a lot more exercises. But for your PhD, I think it would be a good idea to start with what's out there. In terms of growth accounting, how should I say? I think your results are not presented in the most ideal way. Also, if you look at the papers, and that's why I again have the comments in a paper version where I copied some examples for you. I would like to see a split of value-added growth into the contribution labor, maybe also split up into hours and labor composition. Then I would like to see tangible, as you already had it, intangibles again split up in national accounts intangibles, non-national accounts intangibles. Then you can better see the effect of the Corrado, Halden, Sichel intangible assets. And that really shows your contribution much better. Also, I think to some extent you're mixing up ICT and intangibles. I don't know how to go back to your first, maybe I make it. Yeah, it seems. Here. So, here you say intangible assets in Clem's project. Well, honestly, I don't really see intangible assets split out in this chart here. You just have ICT. ICT in Clem's includes IT, CT, and software, and we all agree that a computer is not intangible. So I think you should either rename or rephrase or whatever, or restructure your charts, but this is not an ideal presentation. And then, as I worked on the last release, I wonder, why did you take the 2012 release? There are 2 more releases out there. Well, it would be nice to have some more recent years included and not just stop in 2009, because then you have the recession years after the crisis years not included here in your charts. And as I'm working with Ilya right now, I know that Russia claims growth accounts are available through 2016 already. So it would be nice, for my taste, if you would also show the work from your university here. And also, if I may say, it's a similar question or similar comment on the presentation of your growth accounts. Is it this one here? Also, I think this one has to be restructured a little bit, and you should align it to what's out in the CHS papers, maybe even in the upcoming EU CLAMS release, because the upcoming EU CLAMS release will also have intangibles included, and we also lay out the measurement of intangibles, I think, quite nicely. Here, because you say you have growth rate of intangible assets, intangible capital, and then here you say Russia claims and with intangibles. So is it now included or not, or what's included? Again, I would also like to see here the split of national accounts and non-national accounts and reshape it. You said you have difficulties in measuring intangibles according to the CHS components. I would also like to refer you to the upcoming EU CLAMS methodology. Robert Stera and I, or mainly Robert, was working on intangibles, and he really describes nicely how to measure the CHS components or intangibles. Well, we are kindly competing with CHS and Intaninvest. So I would say we are measuring intangibles now, slightly different to Karada, Halden, and Sickel, using supply news tables from the Wired webpage. And you could also use, we had many discussions with Ilya, and he agreed that it's possible to also use supply news tables for Russia, but just use the upcoming methodology in the next EU CLAMS release. I mean, however or wherever you get the information on measurement is up to you. These are just some advices to help you get your paper a little bit, to pimp it a little bit and make it more comparable and a little better. Thank you. And I will send you my written...
I have just two answers for you, if it's possible.
It's your paper, of course. I just want to help you.
So about this table, I want to tell you that I mean that through CLAMS, it's just intangible part of ICT right here in Russian CLAMS. And
ICT again is ITCT software, as far as I know.
So it's part without equipment. So it's just the database, so this in RUCLAMS, and table with intangibles, it's a new measure, so it's include all components that Karada developed. So maybe it's not just clear, and why I took EUCLAMS to 2012 release is just for comparing results that Karada show. So she show detailed information for European countries from 1995 to 2008. So because of this mentioned, I take this release. So I know that you have much more updated one.
I'm sure that there's a lot of work